Night of the Howler by Jason J. McCuiston. The April night was alive with the call of crickets and tree frogs, and thick with the scent of honeysuckle and pine. It was star-filled nights like this, clear and warm with a sweet breeze, that Alex McCampbell didn't mind working the graveyard shift, especially when he knew his pals Joe and Glenn were working security out at the construction site. So Alex pointed the county cruiser onto Highway 68 and headed to where they were building the dam on Watt Island. It was 2 years since TVA had come in and changed everything, buying up a lot of land, relocating folks, and even moving cemeteries. 17 of them, or so he'd heard. Alex wondered if the Army Corps of Engineers had found them all. Rural Rhea County was full of old plots of land, owned by families who'd been there since before the Civil War, and had been a common practice back in the olden days to bury folks where they had lived. Alex lit a Chesterfield, and pushed the grim thoughts from his mind as he turned up the radio and sang along with Roy Cuff. As expected, Joe and Glenn waved him to a stop as he got close to the fenced-off site. Behind the two armed National Guardsmen, you could see the dark outline of the dam superstructure, and the ant-like movements of the night shift workers. Alex pulled the patrol car over to the shoulder so as not to block the checkpoint. Even this late, trucks loaded with building materials were constantly coming and going. "Evening now," Glenn said, shouldering his Springfield rifle and scratching his nose. "Things that boring out there tonight?" "It's Rhea County," Joe answered for Alex, taking off his tin hat to rub at the sweat above his spectacles. "It's always boring." "And thank the Lord for that." Alex offered his school-day chum smokes before lighting another for himself. "Anything going on out there tonight?" Glenn shrugged and exhaled a cloud of smoke. "We seen some shooting stars out over where Rhea Springs used to be." He waved at the shimmering expanse of darkness above the tall pine and cedar trees. "There was a pretty big one about half an hour ago. Lit up the whole sky." Alex followed Glenn's eyes to the north. The small community had been abandoned in anticipation of the flood that would result from the dam's completion. Most of the inhabitants had been relocated to nearby Spring City or Dayton, several miles to the south, but a few had pulled up stakes and crossed the river to Meigs County or parts unknown. "You hear anything? Like any of them hit nearby? I've heard those things can set houses on fire or even kill folks." Joe shrugged and looked away. "We heard something, but it sure didn't sound like no meteor crash." Alex raised an eyebrow. "What did it sound like?" Joe and Glenn looked at each other, unsure and nervous. They didn't get a chance to answer. A sound like nothing Alex had ever heard in his life came rolling out of the thick woods to the northwest. All three men, armed as they were, went rigid as frightened deer at the sound. Alex would have described it as a man's dying scream mingled with the howl of a wolf or coyote, only much, much louder, and more unnatural, somehow inhumanly mournful. His belly filled with warm water at that sound. "It sounded a bit like that," Glenn said, burning down the last of his Chesterfield to his fingertips. "Only it wasn't that close before." Joe raised his Thompson submachine gun. "Easy, Joe," Alex said, raising his hand and hoping it wasn't shaking. "Ain't no telling what's out there. Might be just some dumb kids or something. You cut loose with that chopper and you could spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. Not to mention they'd make you pay for the bullets." Glenn forced a harsh laugh. "That's why I only carry the one in Old Hilly here." He patted his rifle, but the grin died on his face when the howl sounded again and echoed across the valley. That cry sounded in his soul, hollowing it out, and it made Alex want to get very, very far away, fast. "Sounds like it's moving," Joe said, relief evident in his voice, off toward Wolf Creek. The radio in Alex's car squawked. He was grateful that Joe's weapon had the safety on as they all jumped like boys caught peeking at skinny dippers. He picked up the headset. "This is Car 3. Over." "What's going on, Al?" Glenn asked as Alex finished the call from dispatch. "Old man Rigsby said there was something out at his farm," Alex answered, climbing back into the car. "I'm going to check it out." "Good luck," Glenn said. "God bless," Joe added. Alex smiled as he put the car in gear and headed back toward Highway 27, though their well wishes gave him a sense of foreboding rather than assurance. He forced himself to get the car up to speed. Old man Rigsby's farm was just this side of Wolf Creek. The venerable farmer stepped off the front porch as Alex pulled up the gravel drive. Rigsby had his shotgun in one hand and a lantern in the other, his white-faced hound dog, Rufus, cringing at his side.
"Hurry up, Al,"
the old man said, waving the lantern toward the barn.
"Whatever it is, it's big and it's mean. It scared my old bull, Davy, out of the pen. Lord only knows where he's at now."
The lantern's dim yellow light glinted in Cal's eyes inside the open barn and threw deeper shadows on the darkened woods behind. Alex swallowed and took a deep breath. "What did you see, Mr. Rigsby?" He noticed that Rufus, as aggressive and vocal as a watchdog as you could ever want, quietly hung beside his master with his tail tucked between his legs.
"See?"
Rigsby huffed.
"If I'd have seen it, either I'd be dead or it would. But I don't pay taxes, so I'd have to be the one to go into the harm's way. I done all of that I ever intend to do back in Argonne, when I was young and dumb like you. If when it comes to the house, I'll make a good show of it, to protect Martha. But I ain't about to get killed or maimed for the sake of some dried-up old heifers."
Alex listened to the old man's nervous rant as best he could. He was more concerned with the frightened lowing coming from the barn. He thought he heard something moving in the woods beyond the cattle pen. Something big. But it didn't just sound like a loose bull. "Get back in the house. I'll take a look and let you know what I find. Just don't shoot me when I come to knock on the door." Old man Rigsby scowled before taking his dog back inside. Alex opened the trunk of his patrol car and got out the heavy flashlight. He added another bullet to his revolver's cylinder, filling it to the 6-shot capacity. Taking a deep breath, he said a quiet prayer and followed the beam of light toward the barn. The breeze shifted, and the strong musk of frightened animals and fresh manure struck him in the face. Alex coughed. The cows mooed louder. The unearthly howl erupted loud and terrible from the woods just behind the barn. The cows shrieked and kicked against their stalls. Alex heard all this as if from a distance. His heart hammered in his chest, blood rushing in his ears. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. That mournful howl echoed in his soul again, deeper and longer than before. His hand shook, dropped the flashlight. He knelt with stiff knees to fetch it, without taking his eyes from the shadowy pine silhouetted against the starry night. He froze. There was a pale glow behind those trees. It was a dull, sickly green, the color of old pea soup or pond scum. Dim as it was, the glow seemed more intense than headlights. Whatever it was, it moved closer. Heavy, crunching footsteps. 2 feet, not 4 hooves. The ominous green illumination broke from the trees. Alex turned and ran back to the car, leaving the flashlight behind. Slamming and locking the door, he grabbed the car radio and called dispatch, his voice high and tinny in his own ears. "Emergency! Emergency! This is Car 3. I need immediate backup at Rigsby Farm." Enclosed in the car, he could hear the howl. He could see the green radiance edging around the side of the barn. Getting closer, Alex twisted the ignition, flooded the engine. Damn! He looked back at the barn, and the green glow growing brighter. A scream was crawling from his belly, up the back of his throat. He hit the siren, filling the night with an obnoxious mechanical wail. The unnatural glimmering faded from behind the barn until it was completely gone. Turning off the siren, he could hear the monstrous howl moving away. It seemed to be heading in the general direction of Spring City. Alex let go of the steering wheel, now slick with sweat. His hand shook as he tried to fish the cigarettes from his pocket. He could not understand why he was so frightened. He hadn't been this scared when he raided the Sneed Still last fall, and they had shot at him. For some reason, when that unwholesome green light had shone around the edge of the barn, his mind had filled with the image of Angie Pritchett, her long, dark hair and pale blue eyes shining in the summer sun. And his heart had filled with a crushing terror and grief of the certainty of her untimely and sudden death. He was helpless against the tumult of emotions breaking over him, just like the green waters of the Tennessee River would soon break over the abandoned Rhea Springs to wash it from the face of the earth forever. A tap on the window made him gasp and drop the lit Chesterfield into his lap. "Hey, Al, you okay?" Swatting sparks from his trousers, Alex looked up to see the bulk of Sheriff Roddy silhouetted against the porch light. He rolled down the window and forced a smile. His voice shook as he said, "Sheriff, whatever it is, I don't think it's from around here." The older man grunted around the stump of his cigar. "Well, as that may be, I reckon it's headed into town. Filbert's already there. Care to join us?" Alex nodded and tried the ignition. The car started, and in a few minutes he was following Sheriff Roddy into Spring City. There was a nervous crowd gathered in front of the little town hall, and Deputy Filbert Meeks was doing his best to keep it from turning into a mob. Alex saw several shotguns and rifles slung over men's shoulders. The town was scared, and he knew it had a right to be.
"It flipped my truck over,"
Shouted Ken Fugate.
"just like it was nothing."
"It set my barn on fire,"
Bellowed Abe Roberts.
"I lost 2 horses and all my hay."
"It scared my wife half to death.
Called Marty Harris.
I don't know if she'll ever be right again."
All right, all right, all right,"
Sheriff Roddy said, taking his position at the center of the town hall porch.
"Has anybody actually seen this thing? What are we looking at?"
The crowd's cursing and yelling died down to a low grumble. Finally, Chester Jones cleared his throat and said,
"I seen it."
"Well?" All eyes on him. The town drunk shuffled his feet and said,
"I was out behind the Blue Room."
which surprised nobody as it was the only beer joint at this end of the county.
"I heard this god-awful wailing, like something big and mean was dying. I looked up, out toward the Brady place, and I seen this big man running across the field. It was pitch black out there, but I could see him on account of he was all on fire, green fire."
The crowd was completely silent until Filbert said,
"Exactly how much did you have to drink tonight, Chester?"
Nobody laughed.
"I believe him."
Ken Fugate said,
"I saw my truck come off the ground and fly through the air like it was a toy, and there was a green glow behind it. And it had to be something fierce to make my Polly faint."
Marty Harris said,
"She worked in the surgery for 15 years.
"The Cherokee what lived here had legends," Abe Roberts muttered, but no one asked him to elaborate when he shook his head and clamped his mouth shut. Nobody, Alex included, wanted to go down that rabbit hole. Things were spooky enough without adding ghost stories to the mix. "Well," Sheriff Roddy said, lighting his cigar, "whatever it is, we need to spread out and find it. I want every man here to go home, round up a good weapon and a flashlight or lantern, whatever neighbors you can find. Then come back here in the next 20 minutes. We'll split up into 4 groups and search the entire county if we have to." And so they did. Sheriff Roddy took the largest group of volunteers south into Dayton, while Filbert took a group west toward the mountains, and Abe Roberts took another toward the Roane County line to the north. Alex led the balance east, back toward the Tennessee River. Ken Fugate rode beside Alex as they scoured the back roads heading out of Spring City, winding their way through the darkened woods and hillsides between the main highway and the Tennessee River. But it felt like there was a third presence in the patrol car. an unspoken oppression that kept the two men in silence, too tense to even share a smoke.
You saw it too, didn't you?
Ken finally asked as they reached the clutch of abandoned buildings that had been Rhea Springs. No, Alex answered too quickly. The car's headlights cut across the empty structures, turning them bleached gray and pale as gravestones in the night. He thought again about all those cemeteries that TVA had supposedly moved. Not exactly. I saw something.
Me too.
Alex put the car in park and looked at his companion. You actually saw it? Ken shook his head.
I saw enough. In my head. But more in my heart.
He looked at Alex in the darkness, swallowed, then continued.
I saw my granny in Papa's house and remembered playing in the front yard when I was a kid. Granny is sitting on the front porch and Papa beneath the hood of his old Ford. Then I felt them die.
He put his hand to his face and took a deep breath.
It was awful.
Alex looked out at the empty buildings surrounding them like a sullen, angry crowd, and something clicked. They lived here, didn't they? Your granny and Papa. And Paula Harris was born and raised here, right? Ken nodded.
Ain't nothing lives here now, Al. Can we go, please?
Alex put the car back in gear and headed out of the abandoned village. But he was beginning to understand something. Angie Pritchett and her family had lived in Rhea Springs, but had moved away when TVA had brought up all the land. Maybe to someplace in North Georgia where they had kinfolk. Alex had thought he might marry that girl someday. But now he was somehow certain he'd never see her again. They continued in silence until their search brought them back out to Highway 68, a few miles west of the dam's construction site. Let's go see if they've seen anything over there, Alex muttered, pulling onto the pavement. If nothing else, he could check on Glenn and Joe.
What's going on, Al?
Joe almost yelled as soon as Alex put the car in park.
We've seen deer and coons and owls and damn near every other kind of critter pass through here tonight. I was waiting to see if an old bearded man in a robe was going to ask us to help him build a boat,
Glenn said. He was smiling, but Alex saw that his hands gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles were white.
I don't know,
Alex admitted, handing out cigarettes again. The whole north end of the county isn't on all fired uproar, though. We got all kinds of weird things going on.
You flipped my truck,
Ken blurted. What flipped your truck? Joe asked. The answer came from out of the woods. They heard the inhuman howl, more deafening and more sorrowful than before. Joe almost dropped his submachine gun. Alex bit his cigarette in half. Ken fainted. Glenn said, I'll be... The unwholesome green glow Alex had seen behind Rigsby's barn erupted from the pines on the north side of the highway and shot toward the riverbank in a bolt of jade lightning. It continued to scream and howl like a thing possessed, but for the first time, Alex could see it clearly. Chester had been right. It was a giant, naked man, standing at least 9 or 10 feet tall, covering nearly 20 feet at a stride, and it was all aglow in a bright green flame. At that moment, as his chest tightened shut and his knees buckled and he slid down the side of the car, Alex thought, Granny Hazel would have called that witch fire. But in that moment, he knew that it was a ghost, but not of a dead person. It was a restless spirit of a lost community's memory and history. The wraith of a place where generations had lived, worked, loved, and died, pouring their souls into making it a home. The thing ran screaming onto the rocky riverbank and did not break stride when it hit the water. Instead of sizzling and submerging into the Tennessee River, the thing ran across the surface as if the water was frozen. The green fire continued to burn, and the giant men continued to scream all the way across the river and into Meeks County. The apparition of a quaint little village killed by a world marching forward into modernization, industrialization, and progress. The green glow vanished, and the unearthly howl died abruptly as soon as the thing reached the tree line on the opposite side of the river. It was as if it had simply ceased to be, or had never actually existed at all. What the hell was that? Joe said in a hoarse voice. The National Guardsman stood shaking like a leaf in the high wind. We'll never know, Alex whispered, wiping tears from his face. Maybe it came with the meteors. Thank you all for tuning into tonight's story, and a big thank you to Jason McCuiston for allowing me to read his story, here for all you fine folk. Big shout out to Dark Owl Publishing. Go to them for spooky, scary stories, fantastical fiction, and just a good book. All of you, have a wonderful night, and enjoy some R&R.